check. Hello. Hello. Hello? No? Hello. Good morning, welcome, and thank you for coming. Thank you, Wilfred, for the beautiful music as we gathered here today. Wilfred Langmaid is the student advocate with Student Services here in Fredericton, and he's also a very talented musician. He's been part of UNB Remembers since its inception. My name is Hannah Clausen, and I'm the Director of Projects and Advisor in the Office of the Vice President Academic in Fredericton. I am delighted that we are able to be here together again today to celebrate this special ceremony. It's been so long since we've been able to gather together. I'd also like to welcome our colleagues in St. John who are gathered in Oland Hall, and those of you who are joining us online. Before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that UNB stands on the unsurrendered and unceded traditional Wolastoqey land. A series of peace and friendship treaties recognizes the lands of Wabanaki peoples and established decrees to ensure peace and ongoing relations between equal nations. This ceremony is now in its 10th year. In 2013, a group of UNB PhD students in education took part in the War and the Canadian Experience Teachers Field School in France and Flanders, and they came back inspired to plan a gathering of remembrance here at UNB. The first year, the event was held in the Alumni Memorial Building, just next door. It was a fitting location, as that building was established by alumni, alumnae, and friends of the university as a memorial to UNB students who had been killed in the World Wars. Over time, UNB Remembers has grown. And as you can see, we are now really fortunate to host it here in this beautiful building, which also happens to be a memorial for students who lost their lives in World War I. This building was first opened in May 1924. And as you leave here today, I invite you all to view the bronze plaque over the entrance to the auditorium. It lists the 35 names of UNB's fallen students. Today isn't just a time to remember the soldiers who died in war. It's also an opportunity for our UNB community to reflect on the continued impact of war at home and around the world. Over the next hour, we'll have the honor of hearing stories about that impact, about UNB students who left for war and returned home, and those who didn't. I'd now like to invite the UNB Chorale, conducted by Catherine Welty, to the stage to sing O Canada. Thank you. I'd now like to welcome Vice President Research Dave McGee to the stage to bring words of welcome on behalf of the university.
Thank you, Hannah. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for UNB Remembers. I'm honored to be part of this year's commemoration and to speak to you today. I'd like to start by thanking the team involved with putting together this important event. Your hard work has created this tradition for our UNB community to gather each year to reflect on the impact of war at home and around the world. In my role as Vice President of Research, I had the privilege of seeing so many examples of just how impactful research can be on our world. And while we, as a society, often focus on science and technology and business, we cannot ignore the vital importance of remembering and understanding our past. The soldier biographies presented today share the stories of people who could have been. Had we lived at a different time, our parents, our children, ourselves. Those who didn't come back might have well been successful scholars, historians, scientists, engineers, social scientists, educators, nurses. And then there are those affected by conflicts still raging around the world, many of whom are likewise denied by circumstance the opportunity to explore their full potential. I am a chemist by training myself. However, my partner is a historian, and as so, I have had the good fortune of being able to learn a bit about her discipline and her work, and to more directly understand its significance. I've also had the opportunity to learn about UNB historians' work in my professional capacity, and to see some of their achievements. Working to remember the individuals who lived and died, to understand our past and the reasons why, to comprehend what philosophies, events, actions, and decisions led to conflict. These are not simply relics of the past. They are as well lessons for us to learn from as we strive to do better, to be better, to create a better future. Thank you for all the time today to join as we remember all those whose lives have been touched by war, and I would like to encourage you all to keep this history in your mind and reflect on what we might learn from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McGee, for your words. One of the essential parts of UNB Remembers is to hear the stories of our people. Today we have students from the History Department here in Fredericton who have prepared reflections on students who were killed in war, as well as a student who returned home. First, I'd like to invite Aidan Keenan to speak about Bombardier Thomas Gorman, who was killed in the First World War. Aidan Keenan comes from Blackville, New Brunswick. He is president of the UNB History Society and in the third year of a history honors degree. Aidan wants to pursue a career in history, either in academia or heritage, and someday become a university professor. Welcome, Aidan.
Thomas Gorman was born in St. John, New Brunswick on April 23rd, 1892 to his mother Elizabeth and father Thomas. He went to public school in St. John before eventually moving to Antigonish to study at St. Francis Xavier University. After studying engineering at St. FX for 2 years, he was offered a job by the Public Works Department in Chatham, now part of Miramichi. In 1913, he left Chatham to study at UNB to continue his education as an engineer. However, shortly after the First World War broke out, Gorman enlisted on December 2nd, 1914, with the 23rd Field Battery, part of the 6th Canadian Field Brigade in Fredericton. The 23rd Battery also included 19 other students from UNB. The 6th Canadian Field Brigade arrived so early after mobilization that it was redesignated the Reserve Brigade Canadian Field Artillery. The Reserve Brigade was then used to fill gaps in the 1st Canadian Division's batteries. Thomas Gorman was one of those artillerymen from the Reserve Brigade used as reinforcements. His personnel records state that he was taken on strength from England as reinforcement on June 5th, 1915. During the Ensignia of 1915, Thomas Gorman received his diploma from UNB in absentia. Thomas Gorman then spent the next year or so participating in many of the early battles of the First World War, including Festubert, Givenchy, Ypres, and Sanctuary Wood. Gorman served with the 8th Battery Canadian Field Artillery, 2nd Brigade during most of this period, and it was likely no mistake that Gorman was sent to the 8th Battery, as the 8th, under the command of Major Anderson, came to represent New Brunswick on the Western Front, similar to the famous 26th Battalion. In early 1916, Thomas Gorman was granted leave in England, after which he spent a considerable amount of time in and out of hospitals due to illness. By May of 1916, Gorman was taken back on strength and transferred to the 12th Brigade on the 29th of June, 1916. Again, it is likely no mistake that Gorman was transferred to the 12th Brigade, as Major Anderson, who had commanded him in the 8th Battery, had been promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and was now in command of the 12th. Gorman served with the 12th Brigade during the Battle of the Somme, and it was during the Somme offensive that Gorman was killed by an enemy shell on October 12, 1916. In a letter to Gorman's parents, one of his comrades said Thomas was killed while manning his gun and was buried with full military honors. That same letter also describes Gorman as one of the most popular men in his battery. The 12th Brigade's war diary for October 12th states that one other bombardier was killed by the same shell that killed Gorman, and a third was injured. After news of Gorman's death reached home, the St. John Globe published a statement saying that after prosecuting his studies at the University of New Brunswick, Gorman had every promise of a successful career. Not only was Gorman a promising young engineer and popular with the other men in his battery, but he's also one of the most popular students among his classmates at UNB. Furthermore, before his death, Gorman was recommended to go to England and study for a commission as an officer. His comrades spoke very highly of him, both as a man and as a soldier.
Thanks, Aidan. Next, we have Mackenzie Smith, who will speak about Lieutenant Ralph Lawrence, who was killed in the Second World War. Mackenzie Smith comes from Fredericton and is a first-year master's student in history. She graduated last spring with a BA with honors in history from UNB. Mackenzie has served as a research assistant at the Gregg Center since 2018. Mackenzie?
Before I start, I would like to first take a brief moment and acknowledge that this biography could not have been completed without the combined efforts of myself and Tim Treen, one of our undergraduate students in the history department. Ralph Miles Lawrence was born on March 17, 1920. Lawrence was the child of Fred and Frances Lawrence, and he was raised by his parents in Nashwaaksis, New Brunswick. After finishing his secondary education at Fredericton High School in 1936, he began his attendance at the University of New Brunswick. While Lawrence attended UNB, he served with UNB's Militia Commanding Officer Training Contingent. After completing 1 year of study and service at UNB, he transferred to the Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario. During his 2 years at the college, Lawrence completed his first training period as a cadet with the Royal Canadian Navy Volunteer Reserve at the HMCS Stade Kona. Lawrence recounts in a letter that this training period in the summer of 1938 inspired him to join the Royal Canadian Navy. Lawrence was transferred to the Royal Navy as a cadet on May 1, 1940. While he was a cadet, Lawrence attended the Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, in the United Kingdom. While completing his term in the Shore Training Establishment, Lawrence was noted by his commanding officers for his leadership and overall influence. For these outstanding qualities, he was gifted the King's Dirk, a ceremonial dagger that only 3 other naval cadets had received over the previous few years. Lawrence was cited as a young, promising officer, but also, during his service, he was a young man in his early 20s. As such, he took part in a larger phenomenon in the Second World War, in which Canadian servicemen would marry European women and bring them back to Canada. These women were often referred to as war brides. Though the date is not specified, at some point in his service, Lawrence met and married Agnes Cumming Young, a Scottish woman from Glasgow. She would not immigrate to Canada until after the war had ended. Lawrence started his active service in the Navy as a midshipman on the HMS Britannica on September 1st, 1940. Between 1940 and 1942, he would serve on 11 ships and rise to the rank of acting sub-lieutenant. While the HMCS Athabascan was commissioned to the Royal Canadian Navy in February 1943, Lawrence was assigned to serve with the ship as a lieutenant. Lawrence stayed with the Athabascan for a full year, the longest he had served on any ship in his previous service. This would be the last ship he was assigned to. On April 29, 1944, the HMCS Athabascan was sunk by a German torpedo in the English Channel with Lawrence on the ship. There was, for a moment, hope that he was one of the few survivors from the sinking of the ship. However, a letter from January 1945 confirmed that he did die with the ship sinking. For his service, he received posthumously the 1939 to 1945 Star, the Atlantic Star, the African Star, the Defense Medal, the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal and Clasp, and the War Medal. Like many of the war brides, Mrs. Agnes Lawrence immigrated from Scotland to Canada after the war had ended. However, instead of immigrating with her husband, the new widow immigrated to Canada with the support of Lawrence's parents. This is likely in hopes for his parents and his spouse to connect and grieve the loss of their loved one together. Lawrence's body was never recovered, and for that he is named on the Halifax Naval Memorial.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Many remembrance ceremonies focus on the sacrifices of those who died in war. At UNB Remembers, we seek to acknowledge the complexity of narratives about war and its impact on our communities. Today, we are honored to hear the story of Major Tourney Manser, a UNB alumnus and Korean War veteran who came home and lived a very active life of public and community service after his release from the Army. It's my pleasure to invite Madison Morell to the stage to speak about Major Manser and the significant impact he's had on our community. Madison is a second-year history major at UNB. She's a member of the Legion Ladies Auxiliary. Madison is not only a relative of Major Manser, but also the great-granddaughter of Jim Morell, who was featured in the 2019 UNB Remembers ceremony. Madison?
Tourney Clarence Manser was born March 29, 1930, to parents Bill and Eve, growing up at the end of Gibson Street on Fredericton's north side. The town of Devon, as the area was known, was the host to farmers, railroad workers, and lumbermen who taught their sons and grandsons hard work and dedication. The Manser kids were no different. Academic involvement started early in Tourney Manser's life while attending Fredericton High School in the late 1940s. There he became an academic representative in the Student Government Association, and upon graduation decided to follow his uncle and brother's footsteps, making his way up the hill. While preparing for the next steps in his academic career, Tourney joined the Canadian Officers Training Corps in 1948, where he spent each summer until finishing his undergraduate degree. As president of the UNB senior class in 1951, He was a producer of the Red and Black Review, a member of the debate team, and used his over 6-foot frame playing intramural basketball. Tourney graduated from the University of New Brunswick with an honors degree in psychology and education before attaining a Master of Education from the University of Toronto. Upon receiving a commission in the Canadian Army, Tourney Manser served with the 1st Battalion of the Royal Canadian Regiment from March 1952 to April 1953 in the Korean War. During this time, he commanded men through Canada's second bloodiest battle of the conflict, the Battle of Hill 355 in October of 1952. Letters to his fiancée Audrey are an incredible glimpse into the life of a soldier around the 38th parallel. Working the night shift, fighting off ambushes, and the excitement of getting letters from home. They weren't short of good men, and weren't short of antics either, including enticing the unsuspecting sergeant major with a bouquet of flowers, then shouting, "Duck!" and sending him crashing to the ground, or, my personal favorite, blowing up the outhouse with a grenade. At the end of the hardships and shenanigans, Tourney was awarded 3 medals for his service in Korea and the Canadian Decoration. Following his return home, he transferred to the Personnel Selection Corps, got married, started a family, and retired in Halifax after 18 years with the rank of major. Although his military service was over, Tourney's service to his community was just beginning. While working with the Department of Education, Tourney Manser introduced the General Education Development Program, or GED, to Canada in 1969, with Nova Scotia being the first province to implement it, and administered the program until his retirement. He served as chairman for the GED testing service of the American Council on Education for 25 years and was presented their Distinguished Service Award for his work on GED internationally. As a volunteer, he chaired heritage committees in both Halifax and Dartmouth, as well as taking up many hobbies such as canoeing, birding, and refinishing antique furniture. He was a kind and generous man who accomplished great things while being a loving husband and doting father of 6. Tourney Manser was my great-granduncle, and although I was not fortunate enough to know him, I have the opportunity to remember him and the incredible man he was, undertaking roles of leadership from young adulthood and strengthening his skills in the face of war. Since 1969, the GED program has helped millions of people acquire jobs and change their futures. A proud UNB family, each of us who has made their trek up the hill can credit the University of New Brunswick with helping us discover who we are. I know that each day I step out onto our campus, I am constantly reminded of those who have walked before me. It is those individuals like Tourney Manser and many others who've walked our grounds, then marched into battle, for whom we gather each November. While Tourney was fortunate enough to come home, not all shared this fate. We are here for each and every one of them. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Thank you, Madison, and your family for being here. I'm sure I'm not the only one here today who is thinking about the presence of war in our lives and the world right now. News headlines remind us daily that injustice and war are still rampant around the world. Today we will hear from Hala Bakash, a UNB student and a Syrian refugee, a newcomer Canadian whose life was turned upside down by the Syrian civil war. It's my sincere honor to welcome Hala to the stage. Hala?
Hello everyone, and thank you all for being here today. My name is Hala Bakash, and it's my honor to represent one voice of millions from my home country, Syria. The Syrian revolution started in March 2011 in my hometown, the city of Daraa. A few months later, I lost one of my best friends. She was my classmate in grade 3. Today, I am very grateful to be given the opportunity to remember her and share with you the question that I still look for an answer to. What did such a little girl do to deserve to be killed? What did thousands of kids like her do to be killed while other millions lost their parents, family, siblings, cousins, and friends. Millions of these children did not have the chance to go to school. Is it justice to have little kids grow up on the sounds of guns and bombs? All of this and more was just because people in Syria decided to say enough to dictatorship and demanded their rights of freedom and democracy. I have been living in Canada for about 5 years and a half with my family. In 2013, my dad and uncle made the decision of leaving Syria, and their first choice was Jordan, since it was the closest country to Syria. However, the only way to go to Jordan was illegal, and that was not a choice for our families. So my dad and uncle decided that we will go to Egypt instead. Egypt was not safe at the time, however, it was in a better situation than Syria. My dad and uncle made this decision to flee the country they grew up in and called home for so many years to create a better life for us as their children. Only hours after our arrival to Egypt, we heard that the Egyptian Military Council have applied a new policy that bans Syrian refugees from fleeing Syria and coming to Egypt. Today, we stand here to remember those who fought for us and lost their lives to assure the next generation's freedoms and rights. We are here to remember them, but also to hold ourselves accountable, to continue their mission and assure that every person in the world has the freedom to live, get educated, get health care, has the freedom of speech, choice, and religion. I hope that the generations to come can stand here in our spot and be proud of the steps we took to assure them a life that is better than ours, like those who fought for us. One of the greatest steps that Fredericton have taken to give opportunities to those who suffered from the war was welcoming refugees from all around the world. I really appreciate the chance that Canada, and specifically Fredericton, gave me by welcoming my family into a place that we now consider home to us. To end my speech, I would like to end with a verse from the Quran, my religious book. God says in the Quran, وَالْأَرْضَ وَضَعَهَا لِلْأَنَامِ, and He has set up the earth for all beings, which states that God has given us the whole earth for all of us. He didn't create any borders. He gave us the whole earth as a right for all of us to be able to move and look for our needs and desires. He gave us this opportunity to be afraid of no one else, to have freedom and control over our own lives. But we humans created these borders, which I believe are the main source of all wars. These borders have created hate, racism, and many other issues around the world. I hope that we will have the opportunity to live in peace one day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hala, for sharing your story with us. I'm now pleased to invite Dr. Lee Windsor, veteran and faculty member in the Department of History and Gregg Center, to join us on stage to lead us in the act of remembrance. Lee will read the first stanza of the poem, followed by the last post, played by our trumpeter Matthew Daly. The last post is followed by 2 minutes of silence, after which Matthew will play Reveille. Lee will then read the second stanza of the poem. The last line of each stanza of the poem is, "We will remember them," and it is repeated responsively by the audience. Please stand while we welcome Lee to the stage.
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. They were young, as we are young. They served, giving freely of themselves. To them we pledge, amid the winds of time, to carry their torch and never forget. We will remember them.
We will now proceed to the laying of the wreaths, as we remember all those who have faced the horrors of war and continue to do so today. The first wreath is laid on behalf of UNB alumni by Michelle McNeil, Executive Director of the Associated Alumni. The wreath laid by the Professional and Technical Staff Union, Local 60551, will be laid by PTSU Representative John Hayden. It will be laid in memory of all who have served. Ian Allen will be laying the wreath on behalf of the College of Extended Learning. Our next wreath will be laid by Caitlin Stevia on behalf of UNB's The 203 Center for Gender and Sexual Diversity in honor of LGBTQIA2S+ veterans and survivors of the purge of queer service members from the Canadian Armed Forces, RCMP, and Federal Public Service. Lori Quick will lay a wreath from the UNB Arts Center. Sergeant Oziriel Kaitoa will lay a wreath on behalf of the Gregg Center for the Study of War and Society. Our next wreath will be laid by Tracy Rickards from the Faculty of Nursing. Petra Bergner from People and Culture will lay a wreath on behalf of and in remembrance of UNB employees. Sarah Martell from Strategic Communications and Marketing is laying a wreath on behalf of all who fought for us. And finally, David French will lay a wreath on behalf of Unifor Local 4504. Thank you to you all. This brings this year's UNB Remembers ceremony to a close. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has helped bring this ceremony to life. And a special thank you to the Fredericton Branch No. 4, the Royal Canadian Legion. I'd now like to invite everyone to join us in the lobby for refreshments and reflections. Thank you for being here today.